Good
Okay.
morning, everyone. I'm Kristen Kornienko. I head up the collaboration that is the global studio at the RAIC Center for Architecture at Athabasca University. And we'd really like to welcome you to this latest activity, and we're really excited to have Nmadili back with us again. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement, and then I will pass it over to the members of the AEDE who are hosting today's workshop. I'm privileged to look out at a beautiful lake on lands formerly known as the Salish region of Turtle Island, today known as the interior of British Columbia, within the political boundaries of Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a fifth-generation white settler, now living and working as an uninvited guest on the lands of the Secwepemc Nation, and that I benefit from the intergenerational wealth of land ownership. I'm a squatter on these lands. The region was not negotiated by treaty and remains to this day unceded. Immediately around where I stay, this includes the people of the Splatcheen, Nisconmouth, and Squilax bands. Kuksjam, or thank you. A Splatcheen band council member described the Secwepemc traditional lands to me as roughly defined by the Shuswap Lake watershed, and that it has been occupied since time immemorial by the nation's diverse cultures. There's archaeological evidence of their presence dating back over 15,000 years. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the ancestors and people of these bands for their ongoing inclusive activities towards healing and conciliation, and in defense of the land, water, and creatures of this region. I also live and work in Igoli, or Johannesburg, South Africa, on veld that is the traditional lands of the San and the Sotho-Tuana peoples. I learned in the course of my research a few years ago that significant gold deposits were discovered in both these locations within 4 years of each other in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land appropriation, displacement of communities that are thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and imperial resource extraction. And I'd like to ask that we just pause for a minute to take all that in before we just move on to the content of our workshop. Okay, so I'll pass it over to Sasha. Are you going to be the first to speak, or Joy?
Yep. No, I'm gonna take it over here. I'm just gonna do a little bit of an introduction. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody on behalf of Advocates for Equitable Design Education and Global Studio. We would like to welcome you to the African Design Philosophy, Community Engagement, and Development Practices Workshop. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to participate in the lecture and the workshop. We can go to the second. Okay, so just to kind of go through a little bit of what we're planning on doing today. So today our host for the workshop, Nmadili Okwumabua, will be taking us through a lecture followed by a case study workshop done on mural board. We'll be explaining how the mural board works later on. And in the end, we will all regroup and share our work. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to do our own land acknowledgement ourselves. So in the spirit of reconciliation, here in Calgary, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Métis Nation, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And so just to introduce Nmadili a little bit, so our host today is the Executive Director and founder of CPDI Africa, a culture-inspired, research-based, and design-built movement that aims to develop new architectural design languages for Africa and the diaspora that are culturally and environmentally sustainable, The organization believes in promoting creativity and dialogue for collective community development embedded in African traditions. And with that, I'm going to give it over to you, Nmadili.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sasha. And such a pleasure to be back here with everyone, RAIC, the Global Studio, AED. Such a pleasure. I've been working with some very brilliant future designers of our built environment over the past few months. So I'm glad that we're here today, and I hope that all I share truly adds value to everyone's scholarship in school and of course in their practices if they are practicing already. Let me share my screen. Okay. Are we up?
Yes.
Are you all, you are up?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so let me move some of these things out the way here. Okay, I'm not able to move that. All right, that's closed. Okay. Okay, so here we are. Yes, as I have been introduced, my name is Nmadili Okwumabua, and I am speaking to everyone right now from Abuja, Nigeria. I am the founder of CPDI Africa, which stands for the Community Planning and Design Initiative Africa. And our goal is to bring about these new design languages that are inspired by African culture, preserves heritage, and is respectful of sustainable practices in the use of materials that are local. Today we'll be talking about sweat equity in African design philosophy, what I would typically call community engagement, but we'll start to look at that as I progress through. As I said, I'm the founder of CPDI, and CPDI also has a global studio for African-centered architecture. This platform is available online, on demand for scholars all around the world. We launched that this January, and today's lecture will be taken out of module 5 of the course that I teach on the Global Studio, and it's called Evolution and Transformation of African-Centered Architecture. So this is module 5, and we're going to jump into that. It's all about community engagement, what we would call sweat equity. The first thing we want to do is take a look at the map of Africa. Let's kind of get situated and understand in terms of location and space, what we're talking about when we say Africa. And when you start looking at their design philosophies, the people, the culture, and everything, where are they? What's going on with the continent? What's the visual representation? This map was made very many years ago, before colonization and the redefining of African spaces as we know them today. The groups of people that we call tribes, which is a negative word actually, were large empires and nation states. This map kind of gives us an idea of how some of those spaces may have been grouped together before they were divided during colonization. This map gives us an idea of the scale of Africa. We're talking about African architecture, African people, African culture. You have to understand the size of the continent. It begins to give you an idea. You can see here, this is a very popular map. I'm hoping that many of you have seen this before. You see how you can fit in most of the continents right into the space of Africa. The US, China, India, Europe, and others. So with that idea in mind, you can imagine the size of the regions of Africa: North, South, East, West, and Central. The diversity in geography, climate, flora and fauna, the people, once again, and their culture. These are very, very diverse areas, and you can see, once again, the magnitude just from the previous map. This map, my favorite, begins to narrow down on what we really mean when CPDI says we want to create new architectural languages for the continent that reflect her culture and her identity. Many people think that Africans may be a singular group of people, but actually they're not. The map on the left shows Africa as is, so 54 countries created during the colonial rule when Europe was dividing Africa in 1890 or so. These European identities are how these African nations identify themselves, whether it's Britain, Germany, Spain, Portugal, France, of course. But the map on the right shows true Africa, Africa in fact. The red lines are those nation states, those empires, and those peoples and those cultures that I talked about. Those are the many faces of Africa. The red superimposed lines are the 54 countries. So when you're speaking about African architecture or these design philosophies that we'll speak of today, you have to be very sure of who exactly you're speaking of, where they are, and how they define themselves. If you look at the area where Nigeria is in the western arm of the continent, there are over 250 ethnic groups or people, cultures in that space. And their architecture, their cuisine, their fashion, their music, their language, their spirituality are different. Some may be similar based on proximity, but they are quite different. So these architectural languages, as you can see, there will be a plethora of design languages. Furthermore, if you look at the expanded home space of the continent and African people, it will include the diaspora. As we know, around 400 years ago, for West Africa anyway, 1,000 years ago for the eastern part of the continent, the slave trade happened. Africans were taken off the continent to build the quote unquote new world. So Africans in these new spaces developed new identities, new languages, all inspired by the people who took them to the new spaces and by the people they met in the new spaces. So the African diaspora would be included in the African continent when you're speaking of culture and identity, because after all, the African diaspora is African at its root. So why Afrocentric architecture? Why is it important? What is the importance of research and documentation of the architecture of Africa, or for any continent or culture for that matter? For that, we need to look at the definition of architecture itself. It's defined as the art and science of constructing a building. The extended definition includes the reflection of the culture and the lifestyle, aesthetics, local building materials, like we said, climate, geography, political, economic, purchasing power of the people and their places. It is all of these elements reflected in the built environment that creates architecture. And so if we're speaking of design, it's not just the building, it's the identity of the people. And so when we're going to start speaking of community engagement, which has to do with all of these items, you will begin to see how location by location, the architectural language will change, and the way the community designs and builds these spaces will also change. So like I said, CPDI Africa was birthed, and it launched in 2014 in the United States. And it was to respond to this question of what African architecture would be. Starting off, if the design languages had continued to develop and evolve in their own identity. So let's say colonization could have happened, yes it did. But during independence, when African nations began to get their freedom from European nations, it was an opportunity to begin to create these new design languages, pick back up from where they left off when they were operating as sovereign people. So because this had not happened, because once independence happened, it was the colonial nations that helped the African countries to set up their universities. The curriculums that were set in place were all Eurocentric. So it was no wonder that for Africa, as the time passed, at least 60 years for most of the countries post-independence, the design languages have not really focused on a true African identity, but it's been pretty much replicating the design languages of Europe, because that is what the curriculums are teaching. And so CPDI stepped in to kind of fill that void and say, is this working for us? If it is, well, fine, but if it's not, and it appears not to be working, and there are many reasons why, then how can we begin to mitigate that and find solutions to a lot of the problems that African built environments are facing, but source that from local science and technology? So CPDI jumped into the arena and started out doing African architecture competitions and engaging designers around the world to join us in this conversation as we fast-tracked the evolution of African architecture, keeping in mind that the goal was to preserve culture and to use sustainable materials that were sourced locally. So what are the 5 elements required, at least by CPDI, to create these new design languages, right? In order to create this architecture, as we saw from the definition, there were many things that were involved. So CPDI Africa says, your architecture will respond to culture, the culture of the people, aesthetics, their spirituality, local materials, and community engagement. Community engagement in today's lecture will focus on sweat equity. But if these 5 elements are respected and translated into the built environment, true African-centered architecture will be developed, will be created, and it will solve problems faced not only on the African continent, but in the spaces of the African diaspora. So let's give a few examples of our 5 elements. For example, culture. What do we mean by that? Your lifestyle, how you use space. In our image on the left, we see the traditional compound. You can find this all over the continent, a collection of rooms around the courtyard. This particular image here is taken from Ghana. So to take this cultural elements that is still important today and incorporate it into a contemporary space, we have the image on the right. That's the Oracular House, which was submitted in one of our competitions in 2017, actually. And you can see that the architects who submitted this design also arranged their spaces, their rooms around courtyards. This is an example. Simply incorporating that element into the contemporary. Aesthetics, another favorite, the ECOWAS building in Lomé, Togo by Pierre Atepa, who draws aesthetic inspiration from objects in African space, the Ghanaian Ashanti stools or the Egyptian headdress. Both elements are seats of power, and his ECOWAS building was a seat of power for West African heads of state. An example of aesthetics. Spirituality. You cannot speak about African people or culture without speaking of spirituality. It is the root of everything that an African does. This museum in Cameroon is inspired by the python and the spider, both spiritual, both animals having very strong spiritual reverence in the community, not just in Cameroon, in a lot of West Africa. The snake is a powerful, powerful spiritual force. We also see that in Christianity, but it has a bit of a negative identity in Christianity. Materials, the use of local materials, but most importantly, materials that respond to the climate. Africa is synonymous with heat. Architect Dimas Nwonko, Nigeria's premier architect, only uses clay blocks in his buildings. So how do you source your materials from the site, keeping the cost down and using materials that work with the climate? That keep out the heat. In this case, clay, adobe, laterite, mud, there are many names for it, but it's earth. And African scientists and technologists, as we would say, from thousands of years, have always known that this was the best material to use. The last, community engagement. Here, we see how everybody in the community gets involved to build and to develop. This is where we're going to focus on today and give quite a few examples of how the community, children, women, men, the elderly, everyone gets involved to make sure that the society is designed the way the culture is. No one is homeless. Everything is affordable. And their heritage is preserved in their working together. It's actually part of the culture. Okay. So all of this information, what we do with at CPDI is we bring it to the classroom so that students who don't know this information and teachers who want to use it in their curriculums, they have a place to go. And so these are some of our courses, and all of our courses focus on these 5 elements that we just spoke about. Community engagement, sweat equity. Above, we see the 5 elements. We've gone over them briefly. Now we'll talk about sweat equity. Why is community engagement called sweat equity? It's because for the most part, it's the people contributing their time and energy for the development of the community. It's community building. It's about master builders, the trade guilds, gender roles, spiritual roles. We're going to look at 3 case studies today in community engagement, and then when we break out into our breakout sessions, you all will have the opportunity to explore these ideas or this design philosophy and how it could be applied in our own communities, right? So now, the 3 areas of community engagement will be sweat equity, corporate donations, and sweat equity, and community sponsorship. Sweat equity. Number 1, the image we have here on the screen, most people will think that that is a house. People call a hut a house. A hut is a negative word, but a hut is not a house. These roundables are rooms in a house, and these rooms are around the courtyard, and the courtyard is your living room. It's open to the sky. This home was built by the community. In Africa, like we said, everyone is engaged in building. When it's time for a young man to take on a new wife and leave his father's house, the community comes together to help him. Everyone knew how to make the molds, the clay brick, adobe, whether it's wattle and daub or it's hand-rammed earth. Everyone knew how to make the materials. Everyone worked together. Everyone knew the standard floor plans that worked in their community. Everyone helps the young man to build his house. And at the end of construction, there is a feast, food and drink, to say thank you, because when it's the next person's time, everybody goes to help them. Everybody got involved. The women were the ones who often did the interior design and the exterior design. We spoke about the aesthetics. You can see here in this case, these are Igbo women putting uli patterns using paint, cowrie shells, stones, and pebbles, using those to decorate the house. Everyone had their responsibility. And the homes, the palaces, the shrines, the public spaces were built. Guilds, certain people in certain communities. In this case here, we see men from Cameroon. They were masters of the millwork, the doors, the columns. You can see that they're also heavily laden with aesthetics, sometimes purely decorative, sometimes spiritually laden. But everyone played a role, and when the time came, your community was built. We can't talk about community engagement and leave the Mosque of Jenne out. Standing for hundreds of years, we built at least in the past 100 years. But its very maintenance is an annual celebration, because when you're using clay, after the heavy torrential rains, the walls can wash. The very last plastering comes off in the rain. And so what do? You build a celebration around maintaining it. Here we see people coming in and having, I would say, a pretty good time working together, sweat equity, as we would say, to replaster, to maintain their mosque. And it's not just the mosque, it's their homes, it's their public spaces. This was traditional, right? You see children here looking like they're having a very good time playing in the mud. Yes. What are they doing? They're contributing to the maintenance of their heritage and the perfection of their built environment. You can imagine zero impact, right? At the end of the day, you have a perfect building standing, built and maintained with sweat equity. Let's think about how we could meet some of the needs of our communities, of our neighborhoods, of our families, if we were to apply this very simple philosophy, working together, harnessing materials from your very own site, calling family and friends to build and to maintain. Imagine the reduction in costs and so many things. Bonding of your own neighbors, family and friends, just going through that experience. This is what kept the communities close. Sweat equity in community engagement. Francis Carey, who I'm sure all of you know, has translated this design philosophy into the contemporary. His buildings in Burkina Faso are 99% done with the community. Of course, there are those where he's engaging professionals, but you can see here the amazing architecture that his community has built, women, children, and men, all local, all organic, all working together. Again, sweat equity to build up the community. Mariam Kamara from Niger, again, utilizing people in the neighborhood to build what's needed, whether it's a mosque, whether it's a marketplace, whether it's a home, whether it's a school, working together. Imagine not having these spaces because you did not work together, you could not afford, et cetera, et cetera. All of that has been erased in these scenarios. The last in sweat equity, I'll talk about Robert Taylor's beautiful school, Tuskegee University. Right after slavery, African Americans wanting to now get the much needed education that they had been denied for hundreds of years, were now free to go to school. And the only schools they could go to would be ones that they made for themselves. Because of segregation, they would not be allowed in mainstream universities. Well, beautiful Tuskegee campus was actually built by the students. For anyone who's had a chance to visit this school, it's an amazing and spiritual experience. You can actually see the pits where the clay was dug out 100 years ago. So you come together and you don't have money for your tuition. Well, how about let's build a classroom together? This is community engagement. This is sweat equity. And a very gorgeous campus was built. This collection of images talks about sweat equity today in contemporary Africa. Many people do not want to talk about using local materials because of the stigma attached to local building materials during the colonial times. But instead of living in slums and ghettos, and shanty towns and the peri-urban areas, because people from the villages are moving to the city and they cannot afford architecture, instead of them living in these kinds of spaces, right? Very unpleasant to the eye. It would be quite nice if they could come together and apply this very old design philosophy of working together. These are skills that some people do have, they still have. You could build something with your hands. It's the same material. This may not have a lot of aesthetics, but the same people who are living in this space could work together as a community, once again, sweat equity, and build spaces that are much neater, much more pleasant, and much more spiritually engaging than the awful situation that they were living in before. The second example of community engagement, corporate donations and sweat equity. Here, I'll quickly talk about Millard Fuller. Millard Fuller, the director, founder of Habitat for Humanity, 1940s. He's sitting in the Congo on a missionary trip, and out of his window, he sees a Congolese family building a house. He watches them, they make their materials, they build their house, and the family moves in. And then he realizes he could go home, back to America, and replicate that. And this is what he did, and he called it Habitat for Humanity. And what is Habitat for Humanity? It's sweat equity with a few donations. It's an African design philosophy brought to the diaspora and translated into a way that actually works. So the community comes together, often the church, many hands come together, and within so many weeks, you've got 20 houses, 40 houses built. How does Habitat Humanity work? Habitat for Humanity work. It's people, like we said, but it's also donations, corporate sponsorship. Here we see all the different organizations that contribute money, of course, for tax incentives and tax breaks and many other things. But it's still the community working together. Those who have the energy, who put on the hard hats and do the labor, and those who can donate, whether it's money, whether it's land, whether it's the flooring, the materials for the roofing, sheets, all parts that make up the house, all of those companies can contribute. So at a time when there could have been nothing, with this combination of sweat equity and sponsorship, people have affordable housing. People have the architecture that they need. People have the architecture that they can afford. Habitat for Humanity is a new way of DIY, is it DIY? DIY, do it yourself. We can see in the top left, the very popular brothers on Twins on HGTV, also working with a family to build. We see so many examples, people erecting the walls, women working, like we saw the women in Igbo land painting the uli patterns on their walls. Women can do. And you see the family in the middle. Everyone has a role to play. And so Habitat for Humanity, as we know, has been a very, very grand success. Our third case study, community sponsorship. This example I want to talk about using my own hometown in Iseleku in Delta State in Nigeria as our example. Yes, Africa is probably the wealthiest continent, but the people are presenting as the poorest for many reasons. Here, there are hardly any mortgage systems. So when people want to build, they actually do all they can to acquire land. And then month by month, they buy materials and they begin to build their home. If this year you're able to get your foundation done, great. The next year you're able to get your walls put up, and it just takes you years to finally get your house done. One way that the communities have realized they can begin to solve that problem, not just in their houses, but in their public buildings, is to work together to donate. So in this example, community sponsorship is when a public building needs to be built, but we find organizations, whether it's your alma mater from your high school, or you happen to be a member of the community, in this case, Iseleku, you'll reach out to different members in the associations that belong to the school or the town, and funds will be raised to get something built. In this case here, we're going to look at the St. Teresa's Maternity Hospital that's ongoing right now, okay? So, nice handsome man in the red is my young king of my hometown, and he's here on this poster, and what's he doing? So they're talking about the fundraising. So the maternity ward needs to be built. So here we can see that Washington and California, the different organizations, the Iseleku associations of North America and the UK are going to be donating money to the king and to the community to get the hospital built. So I'm from Iseleku, and all around the world, Iseleku people settle and they form associations. So whether you're in the United Kingdom, we can see the logo for the group in the UK, we see the logo for the one in the United States. We all have our associations. So something needs to be built in the community back home. We do the fundraising, the monies are raised, and the project is built. In this case study, in this scenario, professionals get to be hired. So there's not sweat equity per se, as in you're actually out there making the blocks and raising the walls and putting on the roof. In this case, you're raising just the funds. And here you get to hire the professionals. Now, I have to say that is very important because I never want to put out there that I don't want professionals in the built environment to no longer be able to pay their bills because everyone's doing sweat equity, right? I don't want to put that out there. But in this scenario, at least we get to work, right? Because the funds are raised and then architects are sourced and building contractors are sourced and the project is done. This image here is some ladies in one of the Igbo associations in the US. And then these few images are some of the projects that were recently done in Iseleku by the community, both in Nigeria. There are Iseleku associations throughout the country, not just in Iseleku, and they're also abroad, right? So we have the Welcome to Iseleku Kingdom entrance gate to the town. And then the bottom, we have a project that we are raising funds right now, designed by Dimas Wonko. And it's a new hall, events hall in the King's Palace. In this last image, I just wanted to share, once again, my very handsome king, His Royal Highness Nduka Ezeguna of Oligbo Kingdom, Iseleku. His beautiful wife, top left. He's a very young king. He took the throne after his father passed away. And then there on the bottom left, him and his constituents. So with that, I'm hoping that you have some good information of how you can look at your own communities, right? So once we get into our breakout sessions, if we talk about all of these three, sweat equity, corporate donations and sweat equity, community sponsorship, how could we apply these in our communities in the US, in Canada, even here in Africa, right? Using these three examples, what would you like to suggest if you had that position, whether you're a policymaker in your town or you're part of your neighborhood association, even your community where you might be living in school, right? If you're in urban planning or in architecture, what could you suggest to a community that needs to design and build something new? And maybe the issues are funding or so many other things. Which of these three could you incorporate into a proposal for development of something that's really needed in your community? So let's take a look at that. I'm going to hand back over to Sasha and Joy and the team, and everyone get into their design, into their breakout rooms, and then you will see the instructions there to also follow through. Okay. So
Thanks
we'll
a
see you all
lot.
in 20 minutes. Okay.
Abira will just quickly run through how to use the Miro board, which we'll be using throughout the breakout rooms.
Yeah, great. So thank you, Nmadili, for that lecture. I'm really excited to see this move into the activity. I'm just going to toss the Miro board link into the chat for everyone. And then I'll share my screen. So once you open the link, it might bring you to this blank space. It'll just show you in the bottom right corner where you should need to navigate to. So you can zoom out and move over and you'll see the content over here. We'll separate you into 3 breakout rooms, and whichever one you land in is the case study you'll do. So for example, if you're in breakout room 1, you'll head over here, go to breakout room 1 and work on case study 1. Each breakout room will have a facilitator, so either me, Joy, or Sasha, and you can start to talk about the case studies and the questions. And so over here, we have sort of the film summary if you guys had a chance to watch the videos. If not, Nmadili did go over them in her presentation. And so you can brainstorm together, answer these questions, and then we'll come back as a group and kind of discuss them. If you do have any technical questions, just reach out and we'll try to help you out, but should be okay. So I think Joy's going to toss this in our breakout rooms now.
we're posed with is, what are some strategies one can use to get the policymakers on your side? The second one is, when bringing in hired professionals, architects, planners, etc., a power imbalance can be evident between the community and those making final decisions. What are ways us as professionals enforce this power imbalance, and how can we relieve it? The third one is asking, what are some of the challenges that may arise from this version of sweat equity? For example, technical barriers. Do y'all have any ideas to start off with, or any questions?
Some of the strategies used. Okay, so I don't know. I don't really have a thought at the moment, but are we going to kind of go one question at a time, do you think?
I think that's best.
Yeah, we might get ourselves confused otherwise.
Yeah, I realize that now after reading them all. So I forget the first one too.
So I guess if we've got to define what the project is so that we know what sort of resources we're going to be looking for, or policymakers we're going to be looking. So
Yeah.
does this example suggest a building type, or?
It doesn't suggest a building type. It just says a community builds a facility.
Right,
They use the example of that woman's ward in the hospital and things like that. I guess it's pretty open-ended.
Yeah,
Which-
yeah, well, that's reasonable. So why don't we just choose something, and then at least we have, unless we just want to say in general, we decide what the organization is, and then try to focus on groups that are relevant to those organizations,
Mhm.
that organization.
Yeah. Any ideas, or?
Well,
guess-
of course, sorry, I'll let you go. Go ahead.
Oh, no. You can go.
So policymakers, meaning politicians, I imagine, or organizations that have money that we would like to have.
Mhm.
So we try to focus on those groups. Probably we put together some kind of a, I guess, a program. Maybe we've sketched out some ideas of what the building might be. Maybe we've worked sweat equity, our own sweat equity at the beginning to develop the plan. Once we've got, we know dimensions and sizes and capabilities or programmatic characteristics of the building, then we can again be more focused on who would be a relevant organization, or what would be a relevant organization. What do you think?
I think that
think
makes
that-
sense.
Yeah, I think that sounds good, Alan. What we could also do is just make sure the policymakers are engaged from the beginning if they want to be, so they know
Right,
that their
yeah,
voice
yeah.
is being heard.
Yeah. And maybe what we're seeing the need for this center or whatever it is by seeing some areas of the community or the policies that are being put forward that are lacking. So that gets us to generate our ideas. And as you said, involve the community that's relevant. Yeah. At the beginning, as you said, in the design stages, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, and even just through the visioning, hearing their voice, what they feel is lacking maybe in their community if they're in that
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, I would think that would be critical from the start, so that you could show the process of how this is, what it is you're building is what the community needs, so that when you go to whether it's the politicians or the city officials, you can show your process of how you came to decide that you need a community center or a skate park or a new wing for the hospital or whatever it is that you're developing.
Right.
I think that's such a critical element that's often left out of projects, is to really spend the time on that initial element. And I think the importance of documenting it so that you can show your process to the funders and to the potential funders and to the other groups that are going to be part of the process.
Correct. Just bring myself
What
in
do you think?
live here for a second.
Nice to see you. What do you think is something that entices people to actually participate in these community engagement type processes? Because sometimes people go around and ask the community what they want on just a date or in one instance, and they don't get the kind of turnout that's really reflective of the people there. So how could we break that barrier too, and actually be able to thoroughly or at least adequately speak to the community at the start of the process?
I think a lot of that to me is around, in my experience, is around relationship building with the community, and which often takes time, and often we don't want to, we don't have or don't want to put in, or the time that's necessary to build those relationships.
Yeah, I wonder if the community, you're already together with the community to begin to develop this process. If we're looking, and maybe the community, if it's a hospital or if it's a hospice or something of that sort, there are people that you are obviously aware of who are trying to initiate this program also. So is the question, how do we branch out from our the core group?
Or how do we get buy-in from the different stakeholders to have them show up to the table?
Yeah.
I think a big thing too is at the beginning, when you do reach out to policymakers or stakeholders to be at the table, you have to be clear that their voice is going to be heard, and maybe explain how they're going to be part of the project.
Right.
I think sometimes what can happen is at stakeholder engagements, they can give feedback, but then they leave and they're not clear any of the next steps, or if any of their ideas will be incorporated. So maybe explaining the process a little bit at the outset would be helpful.
Yeah, no, that's good. I unfortunately have been doing most of my practice time has been doing condominiums and large commercial buildings. So my encounters with community organizations is generally when either somebody's objecting to the building that I'm doing or supporting it, or I'm objecting to someone else's building, so representing a community. So the putting the people together has either already happened, or it's just fairly logical stuff. You're talking to a city or the municipality and the immediate group that might be affected by the project. This is a broader range, I guess, what we're suggesting. But at the same time, it's a project that every project has some kind of a boundary. So I don't know. I'm getting a little circular. I can't go further.
I would think it's important to understand the power structures within the community that you're going to work in, because often if you don't understand those, then certain groups don't get heard. And maybe there needs to be, different types of outreaches into the community where different groups feel more comfortable voicing their needs and inputs.
That's a great point, Kristen. Sometimes if you have a forum like this, people wouldn't feel confident to speak up. So if there's different types of engagement or outreach, like you mentioned, I think that would be valuable. Maybe there's an online forum, maybe there's a survey, maybe there are those community open house sessions. So a variety of that will probably bring more people. to the table and get them all on board.
Yeah, and I guess the simple things like community papers, generally every neighborhood has some kind of paper or bulletin or pamphlet that comes out on a monthly basis. So addressing the giving explanations in that might draw more people into.
And maybe building on existing community activities. So, you know, if there are groups in the community that have regular meetings or barbecues or whatever,
Right.
you can build on those rather than sort of imposing what we as you know, professionals potentially from outside the community think would be appropriate.
Okay.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. Maybe let's move on to the second question.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
When we bring in hired professionals, sorry, actually, you can read it. We can mix it up. You're less than me.
Do you mind zooming in a little bit, Joy?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what, are you on a handheld or are you on a large screen? Okay, good. Yeah, because I was blowing it up just with my fingers on my handheld.
Okay.
So when bringing in hired professionals, whoops, up here again. A power imbalance can be evident between the community and those making the final decisions. What are the ways us as professionals enforce these power imbalances, and how can we relieve it? This power imbalance, sorry. So are we saying Big Brother overseeing things here? Enforce this power imbalance.
Maybe
I would,
a little bit, because people we would come in as sometimes we're already going to do the project. And so
Right.
that can maybe spread this aura of, do you really want our input, or are you going to just do what you want anyways? So how can we maybe level it out a bit so we seem more approachable? Or like the process is flexible?
I would
Yeah.
think do things like trying to get rid of the sort of hierarchies of knowledge. So often we come in with the technical knowledge and that's given more emphasis or importance than community knowledge. And so I would think in my experience, that's been really important, is to acknowledge the equal value of community knowledge as opposed to academic knowledge. Or
Good. We're all people, these are the issues.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That is a good barrier breakdown.
And also, you know, like with what Nmadili was talking about with traditional knowledge and around building materials and spaces and how we use spaces.
Yes. So going back to the basics, as you're saying, the either heritage or community systems.
And maybe Kate, inviting someone from the community to really have a significant portion on that design team too, so that they can really be
Representative, right? Yeah, they can represent well. Yeah.
Yeah, representative, and they know their knowledge the best too.
Their needs.
Yeah.
But then you get into discussions, are those needs relevant to this particular project? But that's just the whole design development process, I suppose.
I would say, I would
Okay.
say too, doing the sort of hard work of looking at ourselves and our own biases and our and what we've, our training, and the fact that it is very, in many cases, very Eurocentric and comes from very specific, bodies of knowledge, and sort of recognizing in ourselves that we have that, and that we need to work on being open to other ways of building and using materials and so on.
Okay, because we are basically going on the model that we'd be building it something locally in our own neighborhood, as opposed to somewhere, I don't know, we're not talking about building something in Africa, for example. We're talking about, in this particular breakout, something in a community that we might be familiar with.
But for example, like where locally for me, I've done work with the Splachine people, for example, and
Good.
there are other design philosophies that are different than what I've necessarily been taught in architecture school. And sort of the need for me to acknowledge that those have as much value, and if not in that particular project, more value than.
Of course. So yes, that you're learning as much as everyone else. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, learning and really acknowledging, seeing my own biases that are a consequence of our educational system and
Yeah.
knowledge base.
Okay, those are good points. Enforcing, so the last part, the imbalance, probably your last comment then would be the most relevant to that. Acknowledging where you're coming from and trying to understand where this particular unknown community or undefined community for us, what they need and where they want to go.
Yeah.
But if we're bringing in hired professionals, so we're basically, as part of the question here, how we vet the other professionals too.
Not necessarily, but I think it can be too, like how you choose that team. Sorry, Kristen.
Yeah.
No, that's totally fine. I was going to say that's probably something in one that we should have thought about too, because I know, it so much can depend on who you approach, for example, within the city or the government, and you get to know people who are more open to being,
Exactly.
to doing things in new and different ways. And I think that's really critical to do your homework and know who those people are, because otherwise your project can be killed before it's even off the ground.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the vetting process, maybe there's, although it can get so complicated, but if you try to find people that might be appropriate for the project, that's great. You could still be wrong. And so maybe there's still a trial component to having these people in. Maybe of course we would give a definition of what the project might be or the direction the project is going, and then have proposals given to us to review the individuals, not just from your experience, because you may or may not have experience with whatever the organization is, whatever the community is that you're dealing with, and its municipalities. So it's a cumbersome process because you don't want to make a mistake with the group either.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point too, to put out a request maybe, and then when one receives those, be able to have the community involved potentially, and selecting
Yeah.
the team to you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
In the review, yeah, no, that's good, that would be good.
Yeah, so that the community ends up being involved at all the different steps of the process. Because all too often they're only included at the end when all of these decisions have already been made.
Yeah.
Right.
Another maybe would be being open to interdisciplinary collaboration, because I find sometimes when you're working on an interdisciplinary team, some of those power structures kind of dissipate.
What initiates the dissipation of the power struggle? That sounds like a golden key. Maybe if you give that key to us, we can tidy up
Oh,
the
well, I don't
world.
think I think it's a negotiation would be a better term than key, or navigation. I just mean that, you know, if it's an architect in the room and you know, it can become very technocratic if there's just the architect and the community members so I just find if you have different perspectives from different disciplines as well as the community, then it just, you know, gives more voices and more opportunity for people to feel like they, you know, they understand that, you know, that perspective resonates with them more or whatever. So they feel it sort of opens a door for them to feel like they can participate.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Should we go on to 3?
Sounds good. Caitlin, did you want to read this one out?
Sure, do you mind zooming in?
Yeah.
Perfect. What are some of the challenges that may arise from this version of sweat equity, for example, technical barriers?
What are we asking now?
Maybe it's Alan brought up, has mentioned it's cumbersome. I mean, it's a lot easier to do it without, that's part of the reason I think so many people don't, you know, include community a lot, is it takes a lot of time and, you know, often takes more time and is more cumbersome and.
Yeah, trying to, it's like, I don't know, and this is not meant to be negative, but having people that are less informed but have good intentions, that's another element of the cumbersome nature of this too. So trying to not be, well, as I said, not being negative, but trying to, I don't know, direct the ideas towards, I guess constantly edit or direct the ideas towards the final outcome. That's where we're going to have the ultimate challenges. Not saying that the professionals are going to be the only ones that know that that's not true, but we can't be bogged down in what's the word, minor details that make it difficult to go forward. I probably didn't say that nicely enough. Do you get what I mean? I hope.
Yeah, I think another challenge is just if you're doing the sweat equity, you might not necessarily be trained in that kind of skilled trade.
Right. Which is neither, and we're, I guess at the outset, we have to make it clear that it's not a prerequisite to be a professional.
Yeah.
But it's and I guess the goal is to have a collective view, but somewhere along the line, are things monitored by either the so-called client, being the community representatives? It's a bit of a landmine.
I think, Alan, it's it's a hard thing to control
Of course.
and oversee.
And maybe one of the things at the beginning too is to decide and whether skills building is going to be part of the project, so that
Yep.
And also, I think one of the things I was thinking as well is like I'm thinking back to a project I was involved in, and that got really bogged down in the fact that there were two very different groups within the community that had different agendas, and
Yeah.
and you know, it became these projects can get really bogged down by situations like that, because you know it's more about it, the local politics kind of take over the project, and how do you navigate that?
And that is, again, I don't know whether there's something determined at the very beginning that there have to be methods of handling those sort of situations that are agreed to at the beginning. If something does get into a stalemate situation, you can't just throw away the project. So at some point, some form of decision or compromise has to be attained so that the next step can take place.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Very critical to do that at the beginning, and maybe have multiple voices present in that, so it's a mutual understanding of how to potentially deal with these things as they come up.
Yeah. Probably this is well researched, because a number of these things have taken place in the past. Maybe finding different approaches that have already been given, and sort of determine one that makes sense, and then use that for dispute resolution or whatever down the line. Now, I don't want to sound impatient, but at some point I'm going to have to leave, and I'm not sure how much farther this goes. Do you have a basic idea of what our agenda is for the remainder of this program?
We were going to meet up with the other groups and then pull out some main points from each and then close off. So let's check in with the other groups.
Yeah, we sort of done our 20 minutes, I would think.
Yeah. Can you see the Miro board still?
Yes.
I see our overall board, yes.
Okay, cool.
I'm just going to check in about my timing, to see what I need to do, okay? So I'm just gonna put down my phones and I'll be out for a sec.
No worries.
Yes, currently.
Well, I think the others are okay. So is there anything else that y'all would like to add?
It'd be interesting. I don't have my pencil hooked up to my computer right now, but it'd be interesting to begin to draw the lines of how these all interact with each other. Because I think that would begin to tell us a lot of like
Maybe
how, understanding the power dynamics in the community begins to influence, for example, dispute resolution. And so if we it'd be interesting to really articulate how these interact with each other.
Yeah, we're gonna try and maybe I can try and arrange them and draw some lines after. We're like taking screenshots of all of them at the end. So, but yeah, the others are wrapping up theirs. So
yeah, it looks like we're going to be thrown out of the room in 45 seconds. So
yeah.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say thanks very much, everybody, for your input and your ideas. I probably will have to kind of disjoin from this whole thing. Unfortunately, I have some obligations. So thank you again.
No worries. Thanks for joining us.
And I'll step in if I can at whatever point, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to do a lot. So good meeting you all, and bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry, Natalie, did you want to just finish your thought? I know we just got cut off there, but
Awesome. I think we're all back, more or less. Great. So welcome back. I hope you had a good amount of time to participate and engage in the conversations. I'll just share my screen quickly and we'll go one by one from each of the groups and share some of the outcomes that came from our discussions. So share. There we go. And we'll start with breakout room number 1. Who was in that one?
That one was me, Douglas, and Nerman. Feel free to jump in, you guys, if you want. If not, I can totally share what we talked about. So actually, Nerman is from Egypt, so she discussed a couple of projects that were happening in her community, which were really interesting. Specifically, this project called Haya Karima, which is it's I guess it's not the community coming together, but it's a government-funded project, but it created significant impact on the community and is continuing to, which was really interesting to talk about. And for question 2, which was, do you think that it is still beneficial to use sweat equity to help with one part of the process, or do you think it's necessary to be engaged from start to end? And we kind of decided that it doesn't necessarily take away if you're only part of one step of the process, especially if, say, your specialty is in one specific area or you're specifically interested in one step. We thought it was still beneficial to be part of one as opposed to the whole. And the last question, which I think was the most interesting for me personally, what role do you think the earth and understanding or appreciating of natural processes plays in the concept of sweat equity? Can it help create a stronger bond between the community? And something Doug brought up, which I think is super crucial, is the whole idea of ownership. So private ownership, as opposed to, in our case study, the village owning all of the land, and sort of what that kind of does for the community in terms of, well, if I am part owner of this land, of course I have a stake in it, I have some investment in it, and I want to see it be built a certain way, as opposed to if I don't own it and someone else owns it, what does that say for, like, you know, the community as a whole? And so we kind of talked about how it's problematic that the world is, or at least North America, is kind of run on this idea of, well, profit and private ownership is the goal. And so what that means when that narrative kind of changes. I'm not sure if you guys want to jump in. I'm kind of just going off, but yeah, that's kind of what we talked about. It was an interesting way to end. But yeah, it was a good, yeah. Nmadili, I'm not sure if you want to say anything.
No, that was really good. It kind of segues into what we were talking about in the group that I was in, you know, profit and who owns the community and what can we actually do together, ownership, you know, individual ownership and group ownership. should policymakers control what we do, or can the community kind of like all understand and buy into the vision for community, right? So what do we feel is good for us as a collective, and that just become part of the culture. So you don't need to have governing bodies control you or tell you, you know, zoning and all of that. It's part of the culture. We know what to do. But yeah, let me stop there and hear from you guys or present the second group. It's good.
Did you want me
Alright.
to?
Yes, Sasha, yes. I want you to continue because
okay.
it segues into what Abira just said. Go ahead.
Yeah, so going off of what Nmadili said and what Abira was talking about. So yeah, a lot of what we were talking about, we were looking at, it was mainly talking a lot about how if people buy, like people have power, and if people buy into the vision, if they want to be part of the paradigm shift, and we were talking about how these are things that these kinds of waves and movements, like they start, you engage in these kinds of things when you're young, and it's something that you grow up with. And so if you teach a child from a young age, like they have the power, like you think you live in a city and you don't have, if you want to get something built that you have to jump through hoops, if you teach a child from a young age that if they want to build something, if they want to get something done, that they can rely on their community, and they can use their community as support to get something done. So that was one thing that was one of the backbones of what we were talking about. We also talked a lot about how, yeah, capitalism kind of brainwashes everybody into thinking that if you want to buy something, like our conversation kind of segued a lot into food systems, materials. Like these are all things that, you know, we're so conditioned to think that you have to buy these things in order to acquire them. But everybody can plant a tree. Everybody can, you know, pick fruit off of a tree on the side of the road. So, you know, the main basis of what we were talking a lot about is that community and humanity needs to be connected. And once that's done, then we can go forward, and things like sweat equity become much more not just like something that happens only through organizations like Habitat for Humanity and all that kind of stuff. Like it's something that can happen on a daily basis and is part of all of our lives.
Yeah, it was pretty intense, you know, capitalism, and not saying that capitalism is all bad, but it shouldn't hold humanity hostage, right? And if, you know, like you were saying, you're thinking you graduate, you have to get money to buy land and hire a contractor. But if you had been taught right from school that, no, you know how to build, right? So you would buy land and build, have all your friends who in architecture, everybody was learning how, so you could call and they would buy, and the material shouldn't cost that much, because if we were taught in school to plant trees, right? Trees are so important. Trees don't really have to have a huge price tag attached, because through school, we're planting thousands of trees from grade school to graduate school, each individual. So there should be building materials. And you should know how to make clay bricks because you learned it in school, right? So everything doesn't have to have a price tag, and it disconnects you from being able to live a life that has some dignity. Oh, I don't have money, I can't even afford a house, I'm homeless. And like Moral was saying, like what happens after wars when people are displaced, you're just living in the streets, you're unprotected. People can come together and build houses for themselves, those that need, all of this could be taught in school. So taught in school means you're bringing this back into the culture of the community. Because school teaches us culture. We don't get it all from home, our parents at the dinner table. We get a lot of it from school. So what's the culture that's being taught in school? If it's humanity, then we'll come out and we'll build our communities in a different way. So it's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you, Nmadili. Really nice conversation. Thank you.
And then we'll go to ours. Kristen, Caitlin, or Alan, did you want to share what came out of our discussions? I'll start us off. So we had the third one, which was looking at the fundraiser. And we the background information was the community builds a facility by fundraising from cultural associations and a hired professional or professionals. And in looking at how we respond to this, we started to define some parameters, I guess, going along with question 1. We wanted to speak to the community, which we didn't quite define, but we tried to think of ways in which we could keep the community involved throughout. And I think some big things that came out of our discussion was potentially giving this paid professional a trial period and us as working with the community, coming up with criteria or an opportunity for people to submit proposals. And rather than us just choosing who the design team would be or who's gonna give X facility to the community, you'd have the community involved with actually going through that process and being a part of the selection. Something that we talked about as well was trying to get around power imbalances and the potential to decide early on if there was going to be an opportunity for skills building as part of the project to better engage and work with the community as we decided what this facility would be and also provided it. In order to keep the project moving as well, and knowing that potentially there might be things that come up along the way, have some ideas of how to deal with maybe dispute resolution understood at the beginning. So if anything happened along the way, you'd refer to that and be able to still move forward without rubbing anyone the wrong way or delaying the project. And yeah, those were some of the main takeaways. Did anyone else want to add?
I think one of the important things we talked about too was the issue of knowledge hierarchies and how you need to actively work towards having a horizontal view of knowledge, of people's knowledges, as opposed to hierarchical. We tend to put, academic and professional knowledge above community knowledge and local knowledge and traditional knowledge. And I think, we talked about the importance of, how we need to change our practices in order to make that look like, all of those knowledge systems are equally valuable and have things to contribute to the project and need to be valued that way.
Right. That's a really good point, Kristen. The example that I would give is in Morocco. I learned that oftentimes the local master builder is the site supervisor. So when the trained architects are coming to build their approved plans, they have to go through the local guy. And he kind of stops them in some places because often what we're learning in school is disconnected from the community, right? What they would prefer, what they would like, that heritage preservation, a lot of that is taken out in school. The professionals have superior knowledge to the community members. So one way they were making sure that they kind of kept things in balance was that you had people on site who were the local community people, and then your trained professionals, and they had to kind of agree before progress could be made on that site. So that hierarchy, they dealt with that. And it's very important. I think one of the reasons why things are off balance is because the people are no longer engaged at the table. The policymakers are doing other stuff, right? And the people don't understand why they're not comfortable anymore. Why quality of life, expenses, everything, they just don't understand why they're so disconnected, because they're not the people and not really at the table.
I think
So very
else,
important.
something else we talked about that's related with that, Nmadili, is the need for all of us to recognize our own biases and do the hard work to work on those biases that many of us have, been taught in our education, that we, just to the extent to which we do come in with such a Eurocentric design education. And also something we didn't talk about, but as I heard you talking, I think is along the same lines, is we need to sometimes check our egos at the door, because, and that also takes personal work to be able to do that, and the importance of doing that work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, I think we're going to get there. I hope, I believe things have to come right side up again.
They have to.
Yeah.
Because so much of what we're talking about is so related to the CAP 26 meeting that was just on, and you look at the numbers of people who are being displaced by conflict or climate, and I mean, there just aren't any other solutions other than what we're talking about here today.
Yeah. Yeah. It will change, and that's the value of this workshop. Yeah, just say what we're talking about today. Once we get this into the curriculums at school, and we are graduating just, brilliant future, not just architects and stuff, policymakers, people who have the heart of the people, the welfare of the people in their hearts. The world will change, because we can't maintain this. We can't maintain.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing, everyone. And I'll stop and hand it back to Abira.
Great, that was awesome. Thank you to everyone that stayed, and thank you for sharing. Those are really thought-provoking discussions. Really happy to be a part of that. We would like to close this off by giving a big thank you to our lovely host, Nmadili, for the important perspectives and knowledge shared, as well as the people who attended and supported Global Studio and AEDE. If you have any concluding thoughts you wanted to share, feel free to unmute yourself or write it in the chat. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon. The next AEDE and Global Studio workshop is tentatively scheduled for January, so please keep an eye out for that, and come and join us in our next community engagement in design workshop. Thanks again, Nmadili. It was really great. This was a great discussion. I'm hearing everyone's thoughts and stuff. It was awesome.
You're welcome. Honored. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, everyone.
I just wanted to quickly thank you, Nmadili, as well, from the Global Studio side of things, and also to let everyone know that on December 8th, there's going to be a lecture from David Fortin related with issues around land. So I think that's going to be a really, really great. I'm really looking forward to that, and something that we really need to bring more into our conversations, which we touched on with some of the groups today. So that again is on December 8th. So that's something to look forward to. And otherwise, I just wanted to thank everyone at AEDE as well for all of your work in organizing this. And it's just been a great workshop. So thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And again, the
Thank you,
recording will
everybody.
be made available on the Global Studio website. So check it in the next day or two, so you can check it out there. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.